there's a group of starving artists outside of a shelter. It's a shelter these artists were pretty familiar with. But on this day, this group of starving artists were knocking on the door, and the owner of the shelter wouldn't let them in. It turns out there was only one cot left inside the shelter. And all the artists outside were stewing amongst themselves. How are we going to choose which one of us is going to get a bed tonight? So the caretaker of the shelter comes outside and says, if you want to have a little competition, you can create art, and the greatest artist will be allowed inside the shelter to sleep tonight. So all the artists huddled around their papers and their pens, and they were working, fluttering paper and the sounds of brushes and elbowing and grunts of artists wrestling with each other to try to get the best possible work done in order to earn that bed. And when the caretaker of the shelter came outside and saw the beautiful works of art from all of the artists, he looked them over and he said, "My, if you could see that bed inside, and if you could see the art that you created, and if you could see the gap in how you imagine that bed and what that bed actually looks like, I don't think any of you would want to come inside." And so, on that cold and dreary day, all of these men tried their best in this contest, but none of them could Winnicott.
Oh my God, Dan. Did you make that up?
I did. It was thinking about transitional objects and about the imaginary. Remember that story about which god was it, or challenged a painter to paint grapes? And the painter painted curtains, and he was ruled to be the victor because he tried to move the curtain to look at the grapes behind them. And I was thinking about the role of transitional objects and the psychic space coming into development. And I was thinking about those artists thinking about that bed and making art. I don't know, it all kind of rhymed for me.
Yeah, there's something really interesting about the way Winnicott works with the word and illusion.
Yeah.
Right? It
comes up earlier than creativity.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that if you're familiar with the Freudian sort of orientation, arguably, as his famous book, Future of an Illusion, which is about religion, suggests, but as he himself would say explicitly, part of the whole work of psychoanalysis is to disabuse people of illusions. Illusions generally hold you back or have a kind of high price. But here, it's a little more ambivalent, right? You need to have illusions, but then you need to be disillusioned. Whatever illusion is, it's not necessarily...
I think you could actually replace it with enchantment, that the role of some part of the experience of being the baby with the good enough mother is actually experiencing an enchanted world. You wish for something, the omnipotence of thoughts is real. You wish for the breast appears. And then part of the role of, I've always thought about the good enough mother as needing to appropriately frustrate the child, but you could also think about that as a form of disillusionment or, disenchantment. But the crucial difference, and honestly, this is also why I wanted to talk about this text, is I just wanted something nice, okay? I just wanted to read something nice and not cynical, and that actually is about the conditions of the possibility of creativity and play and I hesitate to get to go full virtue ethics here, but flourishing. Yeah. And that's a difference between, say, Freud with the best we can hope for is ordinary unhappiness, and Winnicott, who really does think that we can, if the conditions are right, be ushered into and then in turn usher ourselves into lives that are creative, where creativity doesn't mean having created, but being in this relationship to the world, a fundamental sort of attitudinal stance. And things are just dark, and I just wanted something nice. And I think this essay is nice.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You talking about that made me think of this.
Okay.
Winnicott. Today we're gonna talk about transitional objects. I know this is cold, and I just made the open a lot less cold, just that, right. Didn't I?
Well, it's okay.
Transitional. We're gonna talk about.
Well, I don't know. We got into your story, and that was a surprise to everybody.
I told you it was an outstanding joke. That was a good joke.
It was an outstanding joke.
Yeah, I'm very, very proud of it.
Oh, okay.
transitional objects.
Uh-huh.
And think about the role that they play in like the development of the psyche, the imagination or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't it kind of rhyme a little bit with like Lacan's concept of desire coming from lack, the petit object ah? And then there's also a little bit of like the engine at the core of the prosthetic drive and this lack that leads to like a potential. And then we have this transitional object thing. It just feels like there's a lack of the mother. There's a lack of some capability that I want. There's a lack in who I am that I see in somebody else that they don't see in themselves. It feels like I want to like make a bucket and put all these psychoanalytic concepts that revolve around lack next to each other and see if you hold them up to the light, if there's like a skeleton here or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that's really striking. And it resonates for me because as I was reading this, I was thinking a lot about one of the few scenes of like infantile play with an arguable transitional object that Freud gives us, namely his grandson in the crib. And there's a spindle. And I think we could say two things at the outset. One, this kind of like landscape of the child developing and relating themselves to the world and what is or isn't present in the world and what they want from the world or can't get from the world. And then that becomes a kind of cipher for other types of adult relationships and stuff. And that involves some kind of dynamic, like literally some sort of system of charting how you put things out there and withdraw. And is there not a thing in the world that meets you, et cetera. That's just like quintessentially, I think, a psychoanalytic tableau or like a genre of thinking, like just on a like meta-theoretical level. Like we're talking about the becoming of a subject through processes of coordinating inside and out, but also what's in the world and what isn't in the world, right? And in that way, I think this text is recognizably of a part of, what Klein too, but also Freud and Lacan and lots of other people. By the same token, though, and this is the second thing, the emphasis placed on certain terms in like each individual thinker's schema of that drama, and also even like the ways in which there are different terms that relate idiosyncratically is a little different, by which I mean lack is clearly a very important term for Lacan.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He emphasizes the dynamic of absence, of not getting there, et cetera. Right. And even like he glosses lack as a term, right? Or at least it's a term that occurs explicitly.
Sure.
For Freud, there is a kind of absence presence thing in the fourth da, right? And there's the emphasis is on the repetition and on the bid for control and mastery, which also mastery is not really a term that Winnicott uses either.
No.
And it is overcoated with themes, again, of like loss, right? These are all kind of tragic dramas in certain ways, right? Winnicott's, again, there is this question of how does this becoming human, this little human baby, like how does it relate to inside and out into the world, et cetera? But the emphasis doesn't seem to be on absence as like a negative or on repetition as a kind of terminal reduplication of the same. Instead, and I think, Abby, this is part of the joy of this text and why I'm so glad we're talking about it, the emphasis is on creativity and on kind of suggesting a third term between interior and exterior, objective and subjective, which is not about falling back on either like a binary presence absence thing or a binary, is this thing real? Is this thing not real? Right? Like Winnicott is very explicit. He's not talking about reality testing. And so what emerges here then in this initially, what's pitched is kind of like, let's just think about the scene of child's play, is not so much a developmental account, though it has some aspects of that, but it's trying to think about some sort of like third space or some sort of way of not making the subjects becoming simply a tragic drama, but involving this kind of capacity to build the capacity to create, to co-create, right? To produce, not like illusions necessarily in the sense of being duped, which like Lacan might think about it, or the way Freud might think about it in terms of, being suckered by somebody else's story.
Yeah.
Here it's like, Winnicott even says, like, some very meaningful group experiences can be founded on illusion, right? The capacity to have an illusion is essential to art, to form real relationships at multiple stages of life's way, and different stages of how you go back to that capacity change over time. So it's not just stale repetition. And to that end, and to that point, I was so struck by how, when in a couple sentences that you think you could read over quickly and not flag, right? Winnicott says that they're models that emphasize a neat binary, inside, outside, reality, not reality, true, false, etc. They don't just neglect this third area that he wants to explore, but he uses a very striking phrase to describe their insufficiency. He calls them not good enough, which for Winnicott suggests, right, it's not just like they're insufficient. It's if you get hung up on trying to continually separate things in this binary mode, there's a developmental failure, right? You're missing an opportunity there. And this is, I think, part of the joy of reading this text closely and why it's such a nice alternative to many of the other things we've been reading. Winnicott seems to want to continually remind us or to get us capable of playing with some idea of like intersubjective creations of experience.
Yeah.
Right. Some sort of thing that it doesn't like cut across us and dispossess us in the way that like some Lacanian theory of the real mind. It doesn't, it's not alienation in the way some other Marxist Freudian theory might be. It's just like,
I mean, I'm thinking about a line that comes a little later. Full disclosure, I've been working closely with the book Playing in Reality, which contains an expanded version of the text that we're talking about today. But there's this moment in it where he talks about how it's not just the patient who has to be able to play, it's the therapist, right? And so like if the therapist can't play, they can't do therapy. And if the patient can't play, then they have to be brought to the point where they can play, and then therapy can begin. And I don't think it's like philosophically radical or like idiosyncratic to Winnicott to say that for him, like all subjectivity has to include some sort of robust conception of intersubjectivity. But I think the way that he does it, with how it centers so precisely on creativity, which is so often understood as this sort of like lonesome solo endeavor, as opposed to thinking about creation as co-creation, to use the word you used before, Patrick, as collaboration. It just like, for me right now, as I'm, reaching for something that is hopeful, this is like a shot in the arm of that kind of sense of like, how can people relate to each other in a way that is so much more than about getting by. And I think Winnicott really gives us the tools to think about that, not just in the space of the clinic, not just in the space of, the analysis of children's play, but in the realms of what you might call cultural production. But I mean that not just in the sense of like, you made a thing, it's published or whatever, but in the sense that like, Patrick, that like you might doodle an animal while we're doing something else, and like we might talk about it and our day is enriched. Do you know what I mean? It's like the little quotidian acts of creativity that are constitutive of a life with others. You're listening to Ordinary Unhappiness, a podcast about psychoanalysis, politics, pop culture, and the ways we suffer now. I'm Abby Kluchin.
I'm Patrick Blanchfield.
I'm Dan Yowell.
Ordinary Unhappiness is made possible and kept ad-free for everyone, entirely due to the support of our lovely and generous Patreon community. Head on over to patreon.com/ordinaryunhappiness to support the show. and receive 2 additional episodes per month, including our journey through Freud's Standard Edition and our wild analysis episodes with our takes that are too spicy for the general public, plus other perks like access to our Discord community and the ability, which many of our supporters take us up on, to ask us for reading recommendations at any hour of the day. Today, in addition to plugging the Patreon, before we dive back into Winnicott and do our favorite thing, which is close reading, we also wanted to take a moment to talk about a cause we're supporting. So, as many of our listeners know, the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research is a cause and an organization that's very close to both Patrick's and my heart. I'm one of the co-founders. Patrick has been faculty there for many years. It is a school that makes high-level liberal arts and sciences education accessible beyond the university. I will be returning to start teaching there starting this summer. But right now, what I wanted to say is that on June 4th, if you are in New York City, please come join us at the Brooklyn Institute for our annual fundraiser, the Institute Social. Open bar, great food, great company, and a chance to support a vital New York City institution. And hey, both I and Sam Adler-Bell of Know Your Enemy are on the host committee. So if you ever wanted to see Patrick and Sam nerd out about Freud in person, this is a good chance to do that.
It's a good time.
All right, that's enough of that. Let's read books and talk about ideas.
Yeah, sure.
Please and thank you.
Okay.
We're going to talk about Winnicott.
All right.
He's one of my favorite. Thanks for having me back on. Guys, let me out of the box that they keep me locked inside.
Missed you so
basement.
much, Dan. Seriously.
Dan's box is that he has too many jobs. But we're so happy that he's like back on mic 3 today. Yeah.
I'm here to be Winnicott'd.
We librarian,
so
artist, you're so many
when
things. Musician, you
when I
creativity.
have to slide that third mic, the slider down.
I do make a lot of things in a lot of ways. And you know what? I didn't have a transitional object.
You didn't?
Really?
No, I know. But I just want the listeners to know that both of your eyes just shot open.
A transitional object before we...
No, we're going to leave them in the dark. Thanks for listening to Ordinary Methods.
Formal chicken outro now.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, let's get into it.
You, like the two of you, are making it difficult for me to enforce the rules of the work group. Patrick, I'm putting you on the spot now. Many of our listeners know we did a big series on Winnicott, specifically on hate and aggression. We're looking very closely at a wonderful essay called Hate and the Countertransference. And we have already done on episode 1 of that an intro to this figure of D.W. Winnicott. Patrick and I have also been on the wonderful Red Medicine podcast to talk about Winnicott. So if you want more of that, there are a bunch of places. But I do feel like just to orient our listeners, it would be helpful. And Patrick, I'm tagging you to do this, to situate us, tiny bit of who Winnicott is, context for this piece, before we can actually dive in to the text itself. Yeah?
Yeah, totally. And for anyone who wants to go back and listen to our episodes, which include a whole bunch of audio drops of Winnicott himself speaking.
Oh, it's delightful.
Yeah.
It's so nice.
Winnicott on, is it BBC?
Yeah.
Winnicott on BBC.
You can find them on archive.org if you want to listen to them in a whole.
But like quick and dirty, Donald Woods Winnicott is a British pediatrician and psychoanalyst and sort of cultural figure, born in 1896, dies in 1971. Again, quick and dirty, he served and qualified as a physician, I believe, in the Navy during World War I. By the 1920s, pursued a training analysis with James Strachey. And then later, under Joan Revere, focuses more specifically in Kleinian psychoanalysis. He becomes a member of the British Psychoanalytical Society in 34. By 35, he's a child analyst. And this is important because a lot of his work is about children.
Yes.
How do you do therapy with children? They can't produce as much speech. Maybe they do things like play. Or, as we'll see, the second episode of this, the squiggle game, right? Where you draw
What's
a
the
little
deal
thing.
with these kids?
It's like actually an exquisite corpse game, Dan. I was thinking about some of our bar activities with squiggle games, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, during this period of the 30s through the 40s, where Winnicott rises in prominence within British psychoanalytic circles, the British psychoanalytic community is sort of riven into kind of a intellectual / institutional / personal / political rivalries between Anna Freud and her followers and colleagues, and Melanie Klein, who has her own sort of coterie. Winnicott, kind of strikingly, manages to chart a sort of middle course between these two, and later becomes associated with what's called either the middle school or the independent school in British psychoanalysis.
Would that make him the dialectic, like the source or the answer between the tension at the two ends?
It's more of a containing environment,
Okay,
I feel like.
right.
Yeah. Like,
it might have you just shot dagger. Put the gun down. All right, sorry.
I mean, it's worth saying like that part of the reason why he doesn't take a theoretical side in this or finds himself unable to take an easy theoretical side is that he is, during this period, but then after the war too, really invested in real world exigent, we might even call them like public health, public policy concerns involving the well-being of children first during the Blitz, and then their evacuation outside the city, and then dealing with children of war, children orphaned by war, and so on. And so he has this continual ongoing commitment to working with children, to doing public education about children. And his second wife is a social worker who further encourages him to do this type of stuff. And by the time he dies in the 70s, he is a figure who is well known, like whose voice is recognizable, and whose interventions, as we're about to see and have seen before, but we'll definitely see with this paper, are in idiomatic English, are sometimes a downright joy to read, are full of sort of poignancy and also an acceptance of some more difficult emotions, but at times too can be kind of deceptively simple, and there's a lot of complexity and suggestiveness there. So yeah, that's our quick and dirty Winnicott bio.
Okay. And so today we're reading an essay that is called Transitional Objects and Transitional Phenomena. It was originally published in 1951. We are reading the version that is a little bit longer and that forms the first chapter of his 1971 book, Playing in Reality. And I suspect the way that we're going to tackle this is by looking at it in the way that Winnicott himself fairly neatly divides up the text into like the theoretical, followed by a series of case studies. I hope by the end of this, the first installment in this conversation about transitional objects and transitional phenomena, that folks will not only have a sense of what those terms mean, but what the stakes are, and understand really clearly why we started with all of this stuff about art and creativity and living together in intersubjectivity. Because that's really, just like Patrick said, even though there is a developmental aspect to this, it's not just about the child for him. It is also very much about play, and play is not only very serious, but a lifelong pursuit.
I just want to underscore that last point of yours, Abby, and kind of express this also as a observation I think the three of us have been developing as we think about different psychoanalytic thinkers and we do episodes about them, which is that you can fall back on the temptation of trying to be really, really concrete about any given term, or to think like, how does this stack up with what I learned in developmental psychology, right? Or what is this term must be like this thing I read about in, I don't know, in Dr. Spock, or that I saw on a TikTok.
Or Erickson or something.
Yeah. And there's this tendency to kind of take a singular term and try and map it onto what another term must be, or to put it immediately in terms of another discipline. And I think we actually, Dan, your excellent question began with kind of, did this in a way that was interesting. In general, though, and with Winnicott in particular, and with this paper especially, what I would suggest is the best way to kind of like read in order to then later make more sophisticated connections between terms, et cetera, is try and take any given term on its own within a universe of terms that Winnicott himself is going to develop, right? So much in the same way as, I don't know, when we talked about Freud in the Standard Edition, and as we've continually doing, like, this theory of the unconscious also has to do some work for him involving the way people get hurt and some sort of theory of trauma. Here, the theory of play, well, if you hear play, don't immediately assume leisure, recreation versus work.
Or even child.
Exactly. Yeah. In other words, I want us to remain open to picking up on the multiple and potentially idiosyncratic senses that Winnicott wants to imbue a term like play, or even the implications that he wants to draw from giving us a scene that seems like it's just narrowly something out of a developmental psychology textbook, rather than trying to collapse these terms into their more familiar register, or to collapse sort of the complexity of what he's working with in terms of another genre.
Oh, and can I just say that I love the dedication in this book, which, to be fair, comes long after the original essay. Patrick, do you know what it is?
No, I don't think I have the same edition.
It's "To my patients who have paid to teach me." All right, so let's pick up at the very beginning.
It's a good spot to start.
It is. With what Winnicott calls his original hypothesis, which is the one that he formulates first in the paper in 1951. Quote, "It is well known that infants, as soon as they are born, tend to use fist, fingers, thumbs in stimulation of the oral erotogenic zone, in satisfaction of the instincts at that zone, and also in quiet union. It is also well known that after a few months, infants of either sex become fond of playing with dolls, and that most mothers allow their infants some special object and expect them to become, as it were, addicted to such objects. There is a relationship between these two sets of phenomena that are separated by a time interval, and a study of the development from the earlier into the later can be profitable and can make use of important clinical material that has been somewhat neglected." Close quote.
It might be helpful for us to just put this in the plainest possible language, right?
Yeah, because this is just like the basic terms in which this paper is organized.
And we can gesture to erotogenic insofar as that like the site of pleasure that then is involved in adult pleasures, the mouths and lips, people kiss and do other sorts of things with their mouths. But that even you can set aside and go to the two moments he kind of describes here, right? One in which basically child is putting itself into its mouth, or like using its hand as a thing to gnaw on, versus child is holding an object and then using its hand that's doing the holding to put the object in its mouth, right? You go from being a kind of, what's the snake eating its tail, like the Ouroboros?
Ouroboros.
Yeah, like a baby Ouroboros sucking on yourself, to now you've got some kind of object. And I should say also, though we may not get this immediately, the use of the word addicted is
fascinating.
Yeah, it doesn't come up much more in this paper, but it does open a door for subsequent analytic and other thinkers to probe at the role of certain types of like drug paraphernalia and rituals or other types of behaviors that are also kind of in this threshold state. But again, key thing, the distinction is between baby gnawing on itself and baby holding an object, which it then gnaws on.
Okay. All right. Now we need to move to a section that I want to look at more closely than that, which is called the first possession. Quote, "Those who happen to be in close touch with mother's interests and problems will be already aware of the very rich patterns ordinarily displayed by babies in their use of the first, quote unquote, not me possession. These patterns being displayed can be subjected to direct observation. There's a wide variation to be found in a sequence of events that starts with the newborn infant's fist-in-mouth activities and leads eventually on to an attachment to a teddy, a doll or soft toy, or to a hard toy. It is clear that something is important here other than oral excitement and satisfaction, although this may be the basis of everything else. Many other important things can be studied, and they include And here I'm going to do my first of the famous Winnicottian bulleted lists. Actually, this one is numbered list. 1, the nature of the object. 2, the infant's capacity to recognize the object as not me. 3, the place of the object, outside, inside, at the border. 4, the infant's capacity to create, think up, devise, originate, produce an object. 5, the initiation of an affectionate type of object relationship.
The first time I saw this list, I was thinking about how reading the list, you can kind of see the skeleton of like the development of a baby's psychic capacities, mental capacities over time, where it starts with like, 1 is like, that's an object and that object's not me. And then by the time it's at the end, it's like, oh, this is an object that's full of stuff that I've poured into it and that's poured back into me. Like the complexity kind of goes up.
That's actually really sharp. And I think it's worth returning to something that's like a perennial object of wonder for us, but I think it's worth doing here now too. Namely the fact that like we as adults have all these ways of accounting for inside and outside, for talking about our experience, right? You know, at least in English, we've got the one word. Other languages have different, like multiple words, but like we parse down different types of experience. I know when something happens to you and not to me, right? I feel someone else's hand in my pocket on the subway going for my wallet, I'm like, that's not my hand. Those are my pants. That's my fucking wallet. Someone else is stealing it, right? Mm-hmm. Yet when you look at the child, like the baby,
it doesn't know that everything's not it.
Yeah. And it like literally doesn't even know like it, the first not -me possession.
Does anyone else have the like, it's a me?
It's a
like,
not
but
a
like,
me.
but like looking at the whole world, like Mario voice.
Did we gloss the Lacanian baby in front of the mirror as being the like, hey, at me, I'm feeling myself.
Yeah, we
right?
did. Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, at me was
well, you
a big
did
deal in that
specifically.
episode.
Yeah.
I'll put that as collectively. But like it is, what the list kind of does is it divvies up into individual sort of like questions, right? Like, how does this child relate to an object? How does a child know that the object is not it? How does it figure out geographic proximity? Does it have good feelings, bad feelings? Does it create the object, or does it, what's the causality of the object in terms of its incipient sense of agency or responsibility?
That's so interesting because I do not read this list in the same way. I read this as very much from the perspective of the analyst, not from the perspective.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. It attenuates and emphasizes all these different things that sort of our naive gaze as adults looking at this child are, in fact, well, they're black box projections on something which you need an analyst sort of approach. Like, hey, there are a lot of different things going on here, and that the naive image of baby with toy is actually a set of problems.
Yes, I'm
and developmental achievements.
Yeah, but it's just, I think it's really important to, especially because Winnicott is such an empathetic writer to the point that sometimes he brings you to see as if from the baby's perspective, or like sometimes from the mother's perspective, as in, hate and the countertransference. And it's important that we see that this really is from the, relatively objective eye of the adult.
And from the adult analyst who, as he said in the previous section, wants to call our attention to data that has previously been neglected by clinicians.
Yes. But part of what that adult view brings into being is how clearly we see things as self or other. And what he is describing is a being who is just at the very threshold of discovering that there are elements of the world that are not contained within itself, right? And I don't even think, maybe as a thought experiment, you can think yourself into that, but it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to do that. But maybe one of the ways that we can, not that even, we could go around the room here and I could ask you what your transitional object was, but that wouldn't tell me what it was like to be baby Dan or baby Patrick. One thing that I want to say before we move on is something is important about the place of the object and the options that the baby is given here by Winnicott. Outside, inside, at the border. That's going to be really important because this entire essay works to break up things that are frequently seen as binaries or dichotomies and to always introduce a third term. So that idea of at the border, in between, you can picture for this, and we'll get into this too, but like you can picture the baby sucking on its thumb, but also there's a blanket held in its thumb. So it's also sucking on the blanket. There's this intermediary zone of me, not me, all of these things happening at the same time. There's always going to be a third term here for Winnicott, and that's going to persist long past the time of babyhood.
That's so key, Abby. And I think to say that in slightly different words, we could say that part of the challenge that Winnicott is facing here, and which that like list breaks down into numbered items, but is actually kind of a problem of things that happen at least simultaneously from our perspective or irreversibly, is the distinction between babies who can't talk, famously infants, or we get the word infantile, they don't have words, and adults who have subject-object dualism, who can talk in terms of, me and it and you and me and all that, who have the dysphoric experience of having someone steal your wallet. In other words, and I love the word you use about like the threshold kind of dimension, or thinking in terms of thresholds. I think that's really going to help us, particularly as we get into the next paragraph specifically, but also into the remainder of the essay, for sitting with what I take to be the core proposition and power of this essay, which is to think not in terms of like a linear stage, this stage, that stage, firm inside, firm outside. Again, like those binary things that you were talking about, Abby, but rather about thresholds, or you could say like liminal phenomena. And in some ways, even while we will say, yeah, sure, the transitional object is a lovie, it's the toy, it can be this thing, Winnicott is not just interested in transitional objects, but in what he calls transitional phenomena, or which we could even abstract a step further and say he's interested in this idea of like the transitional. In other words, or in terms of like transitionality, right? So like that whole idea of there being some sort of third space or space between the two, which is not just a one and done, but an ongoing sort of possibility. And that brings us to this next paragraph, which is wild.
Can I say though also, the way you're putting this also makes it really clear to me how much of Winnicott's sensibility is infused into this, because there's a lot of ways of theorizing. We've done so on this podcast before, or at least we've talked about other people theorizing something that is outside of the subjective or the objective, specifically Julia Kristeva talking about the abject, right, as that which is neither, like literally I'm quoting from Kristeva here, neither subject nor object. This is like, we're not talking about the realm of abjection here at all. We are talking about this space of transition, which is going to be generative, which is going to be like a springboard to creativity. Okay, so Patrick, in fact, has set us up beautifully to get into the next paragraph, where we're going to, for the first time, see Winnicott defining his terms. Quote, I have introduced the terms transitional objects and transitional phenomena for designation of the intermediate area of experience between the thumb and the teddy bear, between the oral erotism and the true object relationship, between primary creative activity and projection of what has already been introjected, between primary unawareness of indebtedness and the acknowledgement of indebtedness, close quote. This is one of those passages where Winnicott is like, it's deceptively simple, and then you're like, wait, I have to really tackle this in a serious way.
It's a crazy dense paragraph. And also it does not, if you try to read it and like coordinate the clauses.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work.
They actually break.
But that's okay.
Right? Yeah. But this gets at the point that I was sort of like leading us into a moment ago, right? Namely that, like, look, I count 1, 2, 3, 4 separate clauses here describing both transitional objects and transitional phenomena, which are together the intermediate realm of experience. And just let me just hit these real quick with the stipulation that I don't think you're supposed to be able to resolve any one of them ultimately or too easily.
No.
Yeah. We have between thumb and teddy bear, okay, between your digit and the toy.
Your stuffy.
Between oral erotism, i.e. the orientation towards your mucous membranes of your lips for pleasure.
For pleasure, yeah.
And something called the true object relationship, which, by the way, we're not going to get glossed anytime soon by Winnicott. All I know is that from one moment we went from thumb and toy, so like thing that's in your body, thing that's on your shelf, to model of distribution of libidinal economy across the body and some sort of relational encounter. So we went from two very concrete things to two theoretical things. Between primary creative activity, right? And again, why primary? I'm thinking about primary processes, but like something that's like, it's you putting into the world or you creating versus projection or just putting back out what has already been entered into you. So namely between like production in this kind of sovereign mode, this sort of divine, some sort of like, infantile omnipotence mode versus like some sort of
reproduction of what has been given to you. Yeah.
With Kleinian echoes too. So we already have like the concrete, two different theoretical ones, processes of like creation or projection or introjection or projection of the introjection. And then also like this other moral register or like a register of like responsibility of agency. Mm-hmm. In other words, of unawareness of indebtedness versus acknowledgement of indebtedness. Each one of those clauses is like a different dimension or like a different, like could be its own essay. And yet when it got kind of casually is like, and yeah, but all those clauses modify or clarify the intermediate area of experience. It's wild because like that's a lot of things, but I guess the thing we can extract from it is this emphasis on there being an intermediate dimension of experience.
Yeah, and it also, while I don't want to scramble anyone's circuits by being like, no, like the blanky or lovey or stuffy, that isn't the transitional object. Like it is the transitional object. Like that is a correct understanding of what Winnicott is saying. It's a little confusing at first when he talks about this intermediary space, including being between the thumb and the teddy bear. But that's just because it's the teddy bear standing alone, as opposed to the teddy bear that doesn't have this special status, which is sort of like, I suck on my thumb, I suck on bear. It's all kind of muddled together. But it's confusing, I think, even to parse this in a straightforward way, even knowing that he does mean this not me object that has a special status for the baby. And that when you think about transitional phenomena, we can get really, like, I think examples always help in this sort of situation. He does mean stuff like maybe the baby starts to be like, ba, 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 or like, ma, 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 or like whatever kind of babbling noise. And eventually that becomes something that helps the baby go to sleep. And so it becomes sort of, it's outside of the self, it's externalized, but it's also coming from within. So it's also, even though it is like the production of sound, it exists in this third space for him too. And I do think that, like, I was recently talking about this text to a group of philosophers, and I had to say, like, you're going to be upset if you try to hold Winnicott to like one specific definition of his terms, because he's kind of, part of what he's doing, even though he's like, I'm going to define my terms, is that he kind of unmakes them all the time. And I think you have to just have your eye on the, like, what is the third? What is the intermediary? And can I try to imagine it from the perspective of this child?
I've totally read this paragraph differently than you guys. I read it as a gloss on satisfaction and like different sources of tension versus different like acknowledgments of release. The walkthrough would be like an infant child opens its mouth and a nipple goes into it. And at some level in the baby's mind, before it has that me-you delineation, for all it knows, it is like a Gigeresque alien creature with a nipple on the end of a tail that's attached to its own back. You know what I mean? Like,
something you doodle. Yeah,
of course. Yeah. Like it is nourishing itself. And then the hand kind of stands in that in that he talks later about soothing versus calming. But when you open your mouth because you're hungry and the breast doesn't appear, you put your hand into it. Then gradually you start to recognize that the hand is not the breast, and maybe the breast is separate from me in a way that isn't fully wrapped around. And then you start reaching for objects around you that you can take into yourself as though it were a breast, and it becomes like a substitute for satisfaction. So like as you're looking for satisfaction, as you're answering these tensions that are coming up, the satisfaction comes in the form of more and more mature understandings of objects outside of yourself.
Okay, so you're taking the ordering of the clauses here as each one suggesting a successively more integrated, mature, complex.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, yes.
That tracks, and I actually think though that's not incompatible with what Abby and I are saying, right?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to go with both and here.
And let me sort of try another stab at this, because I think this really is key, and this is part of what is so challenging about this paper, right? Is that on the one hand, Winnicott really seems to say, I want to talk about concrete stuff, right? I want to talk about concrete things I'm observing. I want to talk about things that other child analysts are concretely observing when it comes to actual kids and specific toys, right? And this also then leads us to like a very concrete idea with like concrete parenting consequences about like having a lovie or a stuffy or an object, right? Like here is a transitional object for this child. Don't replace it with something that doesn't look like it. In fact, parents, Abby, this is a good advice you always give, right? Buy two of the same thing so you can wash one, right?
I only say that because I know that my mom did that.
Well, they're very wise.
It worked. Look how well adjusted you are.
But so on the one hand, like there is a concrete transitional object in all these cases, right? And when it comes to like, yeah, we can talk about that. But also he wants to talk about he wants to talk about transitional phenomena more broadly. Mm-hmm. And there, the transitional object that is the lovie of a given infant is an instantiation of the transitional object qua one of a possible set of transitional phenomena. But he also wants us to think about again, this is why terms are never just in their own, like sort of floating off in their own as satellites. They're always in relation to one another. He wants us to think about other types of relating to objects, to ourselves, to whatever, but to things that he calls transitional phenomena in this intermediate states, which are not reducible to simply a thing that involves babies, but that also might implicate other types of experiences and relationships that we as adults have. And this is the crucial other turn to this, thinking and being attuned to the intermediate liminal register, while it gives us concrete insights into what goes on with individual babies, should not lead us to think that the stuff that is more mature or more complicated on the realm of satisfactions and dissatisfactions, that when we as adults enter into those spaces, or as Winnicott will argue, have to go into these spaces, that's not the same thing as regressing to being literally a concrete specific baby.
Right. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on board.
So
concrete
he wants
specific
us to
baby.
He wants us to think about he's giving us something concrete, but he also wants us to think across multiple cases and to think across infancy to adulthood and individual to group through an attunement to the transitional.
Bravo, well said.
Are we ready to move on to the next section, which is called, to my great delight, Inadequacy of Usual Statement of Human Nature? You will be shocked to learn that I'm not going to read the entire statement of the inadequacy of the usual statement of human nature. I'm going to pick up here with what I think is distinctive to Winnicott, okay? And what is going to start moving us towards thinking about what he calls inner reality, and it's going to push us even closer to what Patrick was talking about earlier in terms of illusion, all right? Quote, "Of every individual who has reached to the stage of being a unit with a limiting membrane and an outside and an inside, it can be said that there is an inner reality to that individual, an inner world that can be rich or poor, and can be at peace or in a state of war. This helps. But is it enough? My claim is that if there is a need for this double statement, there is also need for a triple one. Like I said, everything in this takes twos and turns it into threes. The third part of the life of a human being, a part that we cannot ignore, is an intermediate area of experiencing to which inner reality and external life both contribute. It is an area that is not challenged because no claim is made on its behalf, except that it shall exist as a resting place for the individual engaged in the perpetual human task of keeping inner and outer reality separate, yet interrelated. Close quote.
This is just so cool. Because it just cuts through so much. Because I'm just so impressed in some ways by this. Because he's like, okay, yeah, inside, outside, right? Things that are in your head, things that are in the world, stuff that's in you versus stuff that's in somebody else. Cool. We clearly need these binary distinctions.
Yeah. And that they are important. I also just love to see someone refer to the idea of a rich inner life.
Yeah.
Like the idea you have an inner life, you don't have any choice about whether you have one, but it could be impoverished. It could be, extraordinarily lush. It could be riven with, horrors. Or it could be really, it could be kind of calm, but you have this thing. Just as somebody committed to the idea of interiority as a meaningful category, I love to see it. But for Winnicott, that is not enough.
I just like that he points out everybody has this rich inner life, and then he goes on to describe and you have to rein it in.
He doesn't say everyone has a rich inner life.
Well,
that's the thing. It could be rich or poor. That's
true.
The thing is you have one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so sorry for this intrusive thought, which I'm now making extrusive, but I keep on thinking about.
Couldn't you put it in a third place?
Yeah, I wish. Well, that's right. I'm giving it to the ether of the listeners, but I keep on thinking about Mark Andreessen, VC guy, being it's the double whammy of being first off, introspection's bad. If you're doing introspection, you're being held off. I don't do introspection.
You don't have any levels of introspection.
Yes, zero, as little as possible.
Why?
Move forward, go. Yeah, I don't know. I found people who dwell on the past get stuck in the past. It's a real problem, and it's a problem at work, and it's a problem at home.
Right, which is amazing for a person to say and not get struck by lightning or have a chasm swallow them into hell. But that's neither here nor there. The second thing was his instructions to the AI this morning.
No.
He's like,
this morning?
It was going viral from yesterday. It was he's designed a prompt to make sure that LLMs aren't mistaken, and he tells them, "Don't be mistaken. Don't hallucinate. Only tell me things that are correct."
Wow.
Yeah,
wow,
it's amazing.
Useful. Wow. Cool. He cracked the code.
It's like Big Hearts had been
$1
I'm just gonna trust all my sense perceptions, right? I included it in the get-go, right? Preloaded that shit. Well, and I think we can tug on Mark Andreessen just a little bit here as kind of an example.
Phrasing.
The example of somebody who is denying their interiority clearly has an interiorly impoverished life, even as they're, wealthier than God.
Almost like those two things are connected.
Ding, ding, ding. But in any event, clearly it is absurd, silly, sad, tragic, evil, just in any event, not good to be all about the binary inside, outside. It's not the whole story, right? There's Winnicott wants us to think in terms of something other than yes, you have to have these binary distinctions between the conscious and the unconscious, all these things. But as now I'm queuing us up for this, as people who are invested in psychoanalysis, you got to be able to think about terms in terms of dynamic, ongoing relationship over time, i.e. there's a perpetual human task of keeping inner and outer reality separated yet interrelated. And also there's got to be some sort of field of overlap, of interpenetration, of interaction.
Yeah. I mean, I want to look just at that, this, at the risk of rereading, I'm going to reread an intermediate area of experiencing to which inner reality and external life both contribute. And look, you can think about that in terms of a bunch of kids, playing together, right? Coming up with some things from their hopefully rich and developing inner lives and bringing them out to share. And then it becomes taken up. But my hope, and I mean, Patrick, you know this. I've been writing about this text in the context of theorizing a classroom, and like what can happen in a classroom space. Is like what we're doing right now is this third thing of experiencing. Like we're batting stuff around that's like welling up from, Dan's rich and very Dan inner life.
That's the very generous and kind thing.
And then it's, I think like my point is that like, this is a quotidian part of relating to other human beings, but it's also kind of nice. It's also kind of a nice thing. Having some sort of experiencing space in a way where multiple people bring their inner reality to bear on a shared external reality, but also create this third thing, which is likewise shared, where inner realities meet external reality and form a thing. Like you can think about that as creative, but like it also, you could think about it as probably at work in almost any human interaction.
Yeah.
So like I'm making it nice because it's Winnicott.
Yeah,
I think
he wants to do some work of culture too, right? And that's where he goes in this next paragraph, where he kind of, and this is again why I've been so perseverative about saying we need to think about this something other than narrowly about infantile development.
So moving from inner reality to illusion, valenced positively rather than negatively, and disambiguating between what Winnicott is doing and what others will think of as reality testing, I'm going to continue. Quote, "It is usual to refer to reality testing and to make a clear distinction between apperception and perception. I am here staking a claim for an intermediate state between a baby's inability and his growing ability to recognize and accept reality. I am therefore studying the substance of illusion, that which is allowed to the infant and which in adult life is inherent in art and religion, and yet becomes the hallmark of madness when an adult puts too powerful a claim on the credulity of others, forcing them to acknowledge a sharing of illusion that is not their own. We can share a respect for illusory experience, and if we wish, we may collect together and form a group on the basis of the similarity of our illusory experiences. This is a natural root of grouping among human beings."
I couldn't help but think about fanfic communities when I heard about this. Shared illusory experiences, and then or like fanfic communities that splinter and argue because they're shipping the wrong characters with each other or something like that. You know what I mean? And then when you leave your fanfic community and then try to talk passionately about your fanfic pastime to somebody that is not interested in whatever IP it is that you're writing about, that it's awkward. And the people have to be like, no, I've only seen Heated Rivalry once. I'm so sorry. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm thinking here about Gary Latterman, the religion scholar, has a book called Sacred Matters, about like finding, against hypotheses that things are getting more secular every day, which is not true empirically. He's like, what do we find religion elsewhere? And one of the things he turns to is like the idea of collective effervescence, like people getting together and having some sort of experience, i.e. things that are like
Durkheim's idea of collective effervescence.
Yes, the idea of things like, well, the things that we would generally refer to in a situation where you're trying to explain something to somebody and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? And you say, you had to have been there, right? Yeah. And I'm thinking here about I know people who are deadheads to the point that they've got records, they've got the bootlegs that they can identify of this is 1985 in Spokane when they were on this and Jerry was too fucked up on that. Like it, and they'll be like, isn't this great? I'm like, no, I had the best of CD when I was 14. I got no fun. Uncle John's Band, that's a banger, right? Yeah. But like, that seems to be a thing where like attending that concert, right, being in the aura of, even if you weren't there, like knowing that there's some sort of illusion that this was the thing, man. This was their best, right? This was the sound. And from the outside looking in, it sounds like a bunch of people were just fucked up enough or just at the right point in their lives. And maybe the music was okay enough to be like, yeah, this was a thing. There was a there. And maybe some of them then go on and found like a cult that reproduces it. Here, I think of Dark Star Orchestra, right? Which is reproducing some of those like live shows right down to like the malfunctions and stuff.
Oh my God. Cult Baudrillard. That's weird.
Yeah. But again, it's this idea of like, I don't want to be too glib, but like people do be doing this, right? They really do fall into, or like part of human sociality is sometimes being like, this is a moment. This is a vibe. Are you feeling this too? Are you getting like the goosebumps? Like, again, it's not like there is a objective, empirical, inside, outside, binary way of measuring it and be like, oh yeah, this is the zeitgeist right here, man, right? Or like, this is there's not like a real shitometer that you can like bring out there. Like, this is a thing that is objectively in the space. Rather, it's a whole bunch of people in this kind of play intermediary thing, experiencing something. Yes, sound waves and, the brown acid, but they're also co-creating something that becomes an experience for them in the experiencing of it.
The co-creation aspect feels like influence. Like both religion and art have this property of like, I can see it one way, but then through the passion of somebody else begin to see it a little differently. And in that way, I guess my internal experience of this thing is shaped by the influence of somebody else, which I guess would be co-creation. Am I picking that up right?
Yeah, I think the key thing is not to get hung up on like a kind of chicken versus egg thing. Being like, was this thing real before somebody saw it?
Okay,
right. It only exists in the sharedness of it in some ways. Again, we're reaching for an analogy here. Yeah.
It's funny. I was just thinking you guys were reaching for really different ones, but as soon as Dan went to the fandom one, I started thinking about like religious or like schisms within Christianity and like how confusing it must be when you're like, no, that's the Pope, and people are like, no, that's the Pope. Like, we just don't share this, like
Calvinists,
or even like how like thinking about this, like the hallmark of madness when an adult puts too powerful a claim on the credulity of others, forcing them to acknowledge a sharing of illusion that is not your own. Like when somebody who's much more religious than you are, like makes you accompany them to some sort of, or you're really in where you're just like, nah, man, like this isn't for me. Like I see that like you're really in it. Like I guess I was thinking about things that like rupture the illusion and where like the co-creation is like actually impossible.
Yeah. I definitely got some like burned onto first generation CDRW fish mixes. Like, dude, I hear you like music. You're gonna love this. I'm like, what is this
41-minute long
like,
guitar solo?
What's a Golgi apparatus? I know the powerhouse. Like, this just sounds like no. This is terrible.
The mitochondrion is the powerhouse of the cell.
Or is this like when I sit Abby down to watch a horror movie and I'm like, it's so fun, and then she leaves the room because it's horrifying, something like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I say, you're mad.
That's true. It's true.
No, if we could trope this idiomatically just to make this a little clearer, right? Like, these are all subjective experiences about the question of taste, which is quintessentially subjective.
The Pope was chosen and is infallible.
Which one?
No, I'm just kidding. I don't believe in the Pope,
we're a Palmyrian
even if he is from my
Catholic
hometown.
Groups. The Alternative Pope Project. Google it. It's a great project. But anyway, the point is that these are subjective matters, right? You can't, like, there isn't.
Aren't we in the realm of beyond subjective and an objective, though?
Well, yes, but I'm meaning subjective idiomatically to get at that. Like, idiomatically, we'd be like, well, no, whether or not this is good music or not is a subjective concern, right? It's not whether or not, I don't know, is it or is it not 20 degrees centigrade outside, right? That's an empirical question that is answerable.
You're gesturing at like the nature of the internality of the thing.
Yeah, and the internality, or it's internal to me. It involves my kind of take, but that is also inextricable from like productions of others and also receptions of what is being produced in this kind of dynamic, ongoing way.
Is this the realm in which like the Grateful Dead is good, but also the Grateful Dead is bad? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I personally don't care for the Grateful Dead.
Neither do I.
I'm just wondering, like, I guess I want to take, this is like the philosophy part of me that gets a little irritated with Winnicott, who, like, I think it's beautiful to define terms relationally, but sometimes it makes it really hard to pin things down. And I actually think it is both a virtue and sort of a drawback of this text and probably of playing in reality that the terms are so open. But I want to have more of a sense, and I guess I want to say, like, we can't say something is subjective to mean that third space if we are taking seriously, like, the space between, like, there is a subjective which corresponds here to inner reality and an objective which corresponds in some sort of way to external reality. We have to name in some other kind of fashion what's going on in that intermediate thing. And because we just got into things that we would like adjudicate in a way that we would say is like quote unquote subjective, like the relative goodness or badness or like I don't give a shitness of the Grateful Dead.
Let me take a stab here at disambiguating something. And that will then cue us up for, I think, the next paragraph, which grounds and will bring us back into what Winnicott is specifically doing.
So let's get real abstract and then let's bring ourselves down to earth.
So,
okay.
And a lot of this kind of, again, hinges on the relative, I guess, poverty, supposedly, of the English language, right? When you say something is subjective, that means, on the one hand, it has to do with the subject, but then it also, maybe that means different subjects can disagree, right? Or that there is no ultimate answer to this, or that it's in any event a question of perspectives and sort of interpretation and procedural sort of contingencies, right? But the appeal to aesthetic experiences that we made, like listening to a band and liking it, right? Or even the type of illusory experience that in Winnicott's words might be foundational for a bunch of groups, like we all get together and listen to this band, right? The thing to take away from that, I think, analogically, right, is that this is subjective in the sense that it involves an individual having some kind of experience, thinking certain things, just having some sort of orientation. But it's also about something that's in the world, and in the world enough that other individuals and their subjective experiences of that thing can allow them to connect with me. But that what's bracketed in all this is any type of objective fixity, like an ontological, if you will, like firm being to the object in question. So this is, again, to go back to the distinction we made earlier, being like, it's our trying to think about something that can be observed in the world because of the fact that it has subjective effects and because subjects come around it, but that is not being ratified as just a thing that's in the world, tangible, binary, fixed. And that, in those terms, again, that all sounds very abstract, but I think in the next paragraph, he's going to be very explicit about what that means in terms of his method and the stakes he's putting on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all right. I do think that the language of the subjective can be misleading. And I guess can I give like a really quotidian example? Because we've also had this idea of like co-creating that seems to involve multiple people. I want to just say that, in fact, especially if we think of it in terms of like the adult who, because Winnicott is talking about transitional phenomena and because a lot of the rest of the book is going to be devoted to the idea of transitional space and to like adult creativity and play, that the intermediate area of experiencing to which inner reality and external life both contribute, which he also refers to as a resting place for the individual engaged in the perpetual human task of keeping inner and outer reality separate yet interrelated. This is, I think, part of daily life, and it can come into view even when there aren't other people. So say, Patrick, you come home from hanging out with Dan and I'm on the couch and I'm deeply immersed in a novel. That is very much what Winnicott is talking about. Like there's an experiencing, my inner reality is playing with this object that is bringing me, that is an external object. I didn't make it, right? It's a book, but it brings me into this other kinds of space. My inner reality goes to work on external reality.
It seems striking that in that example, and I'm running with you on this, I see you doing this. Like you're in that intermediate state. And I know, don't interrupt her.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I also couldn't like take the book out of your hands and just stick another book in your hands. But don't worry, keep going.
Yeah.
Right?
Just like you couldn't switch the Pope without my notice.
Exactly.
That's exactly right. And I think part of the reason this analogy or that this example works is because so much, and I feel like I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I don't think it's a spoiler to anyone who has ever seen a child play or has ever been a child playing, to know that part of what constitutes play and thus is like essential for thinking about this intermediate area of experiencing is a certain immersion, right? Like, I mean, and actually that is, I don't want to do like culture wars, kids these days, smartphones, blah, 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 AI stuff. But like actually some of what we're talking about here is attention, right? And the ability to be like deep in an activity in a way that is fulfilling and deeply imaginatively, emotionally compelling. Okay, so now I'm going to get to that graph that you were teasing, Patrick, and bring us down to earth. As promised, quote, I hope it will be understood that I am not referring exactly to the little child's teddy bear or to the infant's first use of the fist, thumb, fingers. I am not specifically studying the first object of object relationships. I am concerned with the first possession and with the intermediate area between the subjective and that which is objectively perceived. Close quote.
And that's, again, I think that's just a turn that's hard to wrap our head around, but seems essential, where he's like, I'm not talking about the specific concrete thing. I'm talking about what is at stake in our selection of specific concrete things and how that tendency to select something reflects a capacity to enter this intermediate state and be creative that ramifies not just for kids, but for adults, right? It's why this book that Abby's reading on the couch, or like what's at stake in the fact that Abby reads on the couch, or why this particular concert and what's at stake in the groups that and collectivities that come from it. But in any event, he seems to be wanting us to not just describe a specific developmental thing or to think about that, though he's about to give us some tools for that, but to ask us like, how do you create this space, or how do we facilitate this type of intermediary engagement? And it seems probably worth saying that, well, the space of parenting, of mothering is going to be one of them, but also too, given that he's a clinician, the creation and facilitation of that capacity seems to be something that he wants to happen clinically too, in the clinical space.
Okay, so here we get into what Winnicott calls the development of a personal pattern. But that really just means, how the baby is going to start babbling at night, or how they're going to start, sucking on the lovie or the stuffy at the same time as they're sucking on a part of their own body. He says, I think one line will suffice here, quote, sooner or later in an infant's development, there comes a tendency on the part of the infant to weave other than me objects into the personal pattern, close quote. And that's basically what you're imagining, is that in the nighttime ritual, goes from just thumb sucking to engaging with this other first not me possession. And he gives us this little narrative that I don't really think we need to read it, but it is about sort of like the baby starts to interact with this possession, and maybe he starts to suck on it. Maybe they start to like rub it on their face. Maybe they start to babble while holding onto it. And then Winnicott says, quote, one may suppose that thinking or fantasying gets linked up with these functional experiences, and says, all these things I am calling transitional phenomena, close quote. And in all of this, I think it's important to say, and I'll say this as we're heading towards a place in the text that I really want us to linger, which is another numbered list here, Winnicott's summary of special qualities in the relationship. As we're heading there, just a quick narrativization is in all of these like rubbing of the object, babbling with the object, what happens? And this should seem really familiar to anybody who's hung out with a baby lately. That object takes on this special status. And the adult, the parent, they know that it has this status, even though they don't experience it in the same way as the baby does. But they're still aware that it has this set apart quality, that it's not simply an object to the baby. It's not fungible, right? Like just in the same way as if Patrick came and took my novel and handed me, I don't know, what's a book that I would hate?
A phone book, one of the last existing copies.
Sure. Or yeah, sure. Like the adult knows that they can't just like take away Blanky and be like, here's some generic teddy bear that I picked up at Hudson News.
Have the cigarette,
right?
kid.
So everyone knows that this is important. And there's also one thing that I don't really think we need to discuss, but I want to just, for the sake of completeness, throw in here, is that Winnicott gives a sort of seemingly throwaway line about gender, which is that, quote, there is no noticeable difference between boy and girl in their use of the original not me possession, close quote. So we've got our baby, we've got our lovie, we've got our stuffy or whatever it is. And we have a note also from Winnicott that sometimes there is no transitional object, or that it's only the mother, or that there are cases in which the infant is, quote, so disturbed in emotional development, close quote, that this relationship is impossible to form. So it's not a universal experience.
I would say that the infant builds up within the self the idea of a mother just like you. This inside mother is then a human being who, like the infant, feels it is a happy achievement to get any experience within the orbit of a human relationship. The infant with an inside good mother is no longer completely dependent on you and on your way of going to meet whatever turns up. Because of these things building up within the infant, the mother becomes gradually released from the need to be so terribly sensitive. One could say that the infant comes to have a capacity to dream about a mother and her loving care. A new thing happens now, for instead of presenting the mother in a crude way with a smile or emotion, the baby wants to tell the mother about the dreams. The mother has to be able to be imaginative for the baby to get this across, because a little playing can mean so much. And who but the mother knows that the dreams and the playing can be happy, frightening, or sad, long before talking brings the ability to tell what has been dreamt in words.
A Winnicott list. You all ready for me to read today's last Winnicott list?
Totally laid on us.
All right, here it is. The summary of special qualities in the relationship.
I gave my wife a similar list when we got married.
Quote, number 1, the infant assumes rights over the object, and we agree to this assumption. Nevertheless, some abrogation of omnipotence is a feature from the start. 2, the object is affectionately cuddled as well as excitedly loved and mutilated. 3, it must never change unless changed by the infant. 4, it must survive instinctual loving and also hating, and if it be a feature, pure aggression. 5, Yet it must seem to the infant to give warmth, or to move, or to have texture, or to do something that seems to show it has vitality or reality of its own. 6. It comes from without from our point of view, but not so from the point of view of the baby. Neither does it come from within. It is not a hallucination. 7. This is the last one. Its fate is to be gradually allowed to be decathected, so that in the course of years it becomes not so much forgotten as relegated to limbo. By this I mean that in health, the transitional object does not go inside, nor does the feeling about it necessarily undergo repression. It is not forgotten, and it is not mourned. It loses meaning, and this is because the transitional phenomena have become diffused, have become spread out over the whole intermediate territory between quote-unquote inner psychic reality and quote-unquote the external world as perceived by two persons in common. That is to say, over the whole cultural field. Close quote.
I love that. That 7th point is like beautiful. It's so the whole list is really good, but that 7th point is like, oh, but that for me in this paper was the first time I like sat back in the chair and was like, I get it. I get it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it that like made it land for you?
Something about the word diffuse, like the diffusion of the cathexis into the entire surrounding world. That like the meaning that you pour into the object isn't about the object. And that's where it kind of clicked. Like, it's not even just about the mother. It's about like meaning and relation writ large. Like the whole thing is right there.
Yeah, I'm thinking about our conversations with Chris Landry or Daniel Drury about Laplanche and Jonathan Lear, this idea of like the good enough world, right? Or this sort of capacitating potential. I mean, I guess what I'm thinking about just looking at this list that's so striking, and I want to mirror what you're saying, Dan, is that it starts very concrete, being like, the object must be washable. Like, it must have a certain tensile strength, right? and so it starts so concrete, and by the end, it becomes clear that it's not just about a specific object, but rather like the object is a template for an entire like capacity for symbolic imagination, for aesthetic consumption, for appreciation, for like it becomes a form of relating and like a field or ground for the capacity to relate. And it's a pretty remarkable movement.
For me, I think, I mean, I understand cathexis and decathexis. I've been thinking about them for a long time, but I do think that this is like the best example I've ever seen of like the really precise use of the word decathexis, like such like to the point that it makes readers understand that concept better. Because you can just think about like, oh, right, that meant something to me, but I've let it go. Mm-hmm. And like, I can conjure these like dim echoes of that feeling. Somehow it's like easier to think about that in terms of like an object, like a stuffed animal or something, than it does like a once beloved person.
Yeah. Oh man, that reminds me, I've probably seen this in multiple like movies and TV shows, but that like trope of a character who's lost a parent and is like cleaning out their parents' house and find their stuffed animal. And like all the love and mourning that they have for their parent in that moment gets poured into this object that had also like that had been a tool of weaning from their parent already once in their life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's really helpful. I mean, I think this is also really clarifying for people who might want to go back and read Hate and the Countertransference after this, because I think it's a little bit more intuitive. Like if you've seen kids, right? Like, what the kinds of things that they put these objects through, and it makes so much clearer why the good enough mother and thus the analyst would have to be comfortable with hate. Right? Because you really get in this way that part of the task of the object is to be able to be destroyed and yet continue to like survive its own destruction.
Carried forward. Yeah.
Aggression is like the child hitting, or it's not, aggression is a way of being in the world. It's not being aggro in the sense of like being simply bad and having bad, like malicious, malevolent vibes. It's like you push back, you push. Like it's creative in that way. And
it's in the realm of just like what it is to be an experiencing being, discovering a world to which you react.
And I think that this is a dynamic process.
Yeah.
Right? This is an ongoing thing. And it involves movements on the one hand in terms of individual development and maturation, but also like movements of affect and feeling and memory and time, but in a way that's not like deterministic or simplistic, by which I mean, he's very clear about this, right? This isn't like the rosebud. It's not like the key to Citizen Kane sort of whole thing. It's in some ways actually an analogy here might be kind of helpful. It's not like this is the thing that caused the thing. Though later he does say this may have implications for fetishism and, for all sorts of life.
The string. We'll get that to the next episode. Yeah.
But the idea in this here is that it's not like here is a thing that unravels everything in terms of its positive content. Rather, it was a kind of contingent thing that laid the template for every other type of relation.
Yes.
Right. And in that way, it's not too dissimilar in some ways to talk about another like meta theoretical way of thinking for what we've been talking about psychic injury, right? Or primal scenes, right? It could just be, it's some fucking blanket. Like it's some like squishy toy that came out of one of those like machines that you put a quarter into outside a grocery store. Like it's just a thing. The child's choice of it is fairly random, but also it encapsulates something and then you move on from it. And I guess that's the second thing I kind of wanted to say, which is to add another element to this idea of the transition, right? Where it's not just about the like boundary zone or the intermediary zone between self and other, inside and outside, right? Those type of like spatialized transitions. The role of the transitional object, and even what that type of thinking inaugurates, it's a way of thinking about transitions that the subject undergoes, right?
Yeah.
It's about transitioning from being the child with juvenile omnipotence, right? Infantile omnipotence, and the only object in the world is mom, and is mom you or me, right? It's like a demi-object. And part of what it does is it helps you transition into other types of objects, right? Or in its adult form, even as it does, I think like the Velveteen Rabbit or Puff the Magic Dragon or finding some banal thing from your parents that then, brings you back in tears. Those are movements and transitions too. And there's a motility to them, right? There's a felt power, and they're things that are in the world, but they're also of us, and they matter in the world because of us. It's a nicely, overdetermined way of thinking about like our mutual agential and sort of interactive capacities.
You're saying the real transitional objects are the friends we learned we could make along the way.
Yeah.
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 I was thinking also about the question of how to understand transition and transitional in this context. And I think it bears saying, and this probably plays well with some of Patrick's initial warnings not to read this as just a developmental text. But I don't think transition here is like wholly teleological. Like you can certainly read it as you are a creature, a baby who doesn't have a sense of the world outside of the self, and the mother, which maybe still coincides with you in your imagining, to being an adult human with the ability to relate, to think, to play, to dream, etc. But I also think that because of the way that Winnicott talks about how transitional phenomena become diffused over the whole cultural field, you can also think about transition as just being something that is like a state that we need to be able to work in, so that like to enter into a therapist's office, if it's going well, that also gives you a transitional space. To go into a classroom is a transitional space. There are these, sort of like more than usually fecund sites for non-purposive play and meaning making. And on that note, I want to read the very short paragraph that follows that list, which is as follows. Quote, at this point, my subject widens out into that of play and of artistic creativity and appreciation and of religious feeling and of dreaming and also of fetishism, lying and stealing, the origin and loss of affectionate feeling, drug addiction, the talisman of obsessional rituals, etc. Close quote.
What a guy.
Yeah,
what a
damn.
guy does Winnicott.
Damn.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
But think of those again, and I should have actually, when I was talking about the classroom and the therapist's office, I've got Dan right in front of me. I should have been thinking about like the artist's studio, right? Or even just like the state of, I see when you and Patrick get together and do art, like you're doing parallel play,
That's right. Yeah.
When we play video games together.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do our military Barbie games.
That's true. They're dressing them up.
That's true, but it doesn't seem quite as...
I get emotionally invested in them. I get lost in a world. I don't know. They make me angry. That seems like play. That's play.
You're playing. You guys are, when you are playing video games together, you are mostly talking about your feelings.
Yeah.
Yes.
While not looking at each other. So,
I love this idea of a non-purposive, non-teleological element to it. And
I'm stealing that, by the way, just from later in this book.
Yeah.
That is not me. It's me importing the language of teleology, but non-purposive is explicitly Winnicott.
yeah, and I think that's the real thing to extract even from, like the next page, which I'm not trying to lead us into too quickly, but also I think in some ways, like when he tries to talk so much about symbolism and specificity, I think it gets a little hard to follow, and I'm not sure it really works as well. But he does have this line about how what the transitional object and what what transitional phenomena encompass in the developmental context is, well, they're, in fact, maybe even he sort of says it more precisely, what we call transitional objects are what we from the outside as adults are identifying as being like these significant tools, platforms, moments, whatever. They're necessary for the infant's journey of progress towards experiencing.
Is that in quotes?
Yeah. He says, the transitional object is what we see of the journey of progress toward experiencing. And I love that because like there's no destination. It's also a journey of movement towards processing things, right? And at that point it becomes about like the capacity to experience or expanding the capacity to experience or helping a person move through experience as opposed to getting stuck in it. In other words, there are a whole lot of things that, and here I'm just thinking about what you were saying a few minutes ago, Abby, are like what's best in the transitional phenomena or the transitional space of like a classroom or a therapeutic encounter or even a good conversation between people or going to see a film or consuming a piece of art, right? You're moving. You're progressing, not necessarily in the sense of like getting better or anything else per se, like not on a linear movement, but you are moving through and expanding both what you're experiencing and also your capacity to experience. And that seems like that puts us back in that virtue ethics territory almost that we began with, Abby, right? Like that seems like a good thing. Like you want to have your child, if you have a kid, have a journey of growth in the capacity to experience. Right. As we get older, or like when I consume a piece of art, right, I really walk away from it being like, hell yeah, that was great. I'm more numb to the world and it gave me back exactly what I wanted, except even more simplistically. Right. That's like the Kish cycle.
Wait,
right?
what?
Like,
like being sarcastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like,
sorry, I was kind of thinking of something else.
It's all right. Like, yeah, this Thomas Kincaid painting is great. I can never have to see another fucking one of those things. Right. Like, you want something that, and I don't think this is just like, snobbishness. You want something that sometimes like makes you feel a little bit different, right? Or like opens up something, or it has some sort of impact, right? Like, or another way of saying this, maybe I'm going back to the aesthetic analogies, which you're right, Abby, are not perfect. Like you go out and see a movie with someone, and then you just like can't talk about it because the thing was so like inert. Like that would be the opposite of any type of creative encounter between two people, or it would be a terrible date at the very least. Where you're like, okay, yeah, movie, nothing to say. It said itself. Right. There's no movement for us. There's no movement in it.
No room to play with it.
Yeah. Like there's something, who knows how the conversation could go? You could have a fight. You could walk away. Like who knows what the meaning of the text that you two consume together will be, because in some ways the text is an intermediary object, right? But it only seems like a worthwhile endeavor if there's something to happen after it, if it sets something in motion, whereas one that just does nothing or like erases itself would be, well, we need to operate in that transitional space, right?
That was a lot of theory-heavy stuff. We talked about a lot of theory. I have to say, it's been really fun for me to talk to you guys about this, because when I read this paper, Winnicott has this way of writing where Freud, I'm not even going to mention Lacan here. Freud, I can read one of his papers and I understand it insofar as my misunderstanding, and I want to go back and hit it a second or a third time to like really fully wrap my head around like the prose or the examples or whatever. Sometimes it can be a little bit of an enigma. Winnicott, I read this paper like 3 or 4 times to prepare for this, and there's something about the way he writes that I can read it once and walk away feeling like I got what he was putting down and I understand it. And now, especially for Winnicott, where like I do have to work around, I have to work around a lot of children. Oh my God. It's really fun. I really enjoy it. I get to work around children a lot. And
you mean in the kids' library?
Yeah, in the library. And now after reading this, like at a cursory level, my understanding, when I see a kid walk in and they have their stuffed animal, I know the kids' names. I know the animals' names.
Do you learn their names?
Yeah. I have to learn all of them.
You're
and now,
such a good person.
Well, I already did it because like I've got nieces and they have, little animal stuffies that they're carrying around. And you have to, respect their animals as though they are people. Like you take play very seriously. I learned that from our previous Winnicott conversations. Now I see these stuffies in a whole new light. So much more depth, so much more interest in like, who is the kid handing the stuffy to when they sit down at the computer to play a game is really like a fun thought experiment to occupy my time with. All that to say, talking with you guys about this paper right now, I'm wrapping my head around like epistemological quagmires that I didn't realize were even in this paper. I'm seeing like so much more depth, and there's a language to, especially that one paragraph with all of the comparisons
Yes.
that has more going on for me and not even necessarily for the kids that I see, if that makes sense.
Yes,
That
it
now
does.
I kind of want to go back and read this again. So thanks, guys. Yeah, good read. Interesting.
You can read the rest of the book too.
Yeah.
No, it's good. It's about art.
It's a book.
And creativity.
Somebody will make a podcast about it. And I'll get that
Oh
way.
my gosh.
I'm joking.
You're going to be there as we read through the next episodes where we do the rest
I'll
of
be
this.
on. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
good,
for sure,
good,
for sure.
good.
But yeah, it does stand. I shouldn't say that. It does stand alone. But playing in reality develops, like playing in reality, which comes 20 years after, is Winnicott being like, I should take this essay and make it into a book that really gets into exactly the part that I think scratched an itch for you, Dan, about the decathexis of the transitional object and like the spreading out of all of those feelings into the cultural field. That's what the rest of the book
That's
is.
awesome. Because
we got to read it then. Yeah.
That moment in the paper is like, it's like in The Wizard of Oz when she ends up in Oz and it goes from black and white to color.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what an awesome image. That's so cool.
I'm thinking right now about just like how much I want us to read the whole book together in some ways, because it also like makes us think about, I think on the one hand, we could probably use this to think about like what's wrong in like creation that isn't creation, right? Like TikTok content, AI content that's like tailored to you, but that gives you nothing new. Like there's probably a whole semiosis of kitsch and a whole way of thinking about like the denial or of the transitional or resistance to entering that space. And maybe we want to think about that.
Yeah. So we're going to leave this essay here for the day because this is sort of a natural demarcation between the theoretical section and what's going to come next, which is a series of clinical anecdotes.
There's a great story about a pair of twins, and one of them is, we'll say, disturbingly into string. It's a good story.
Yeah. So that will be next weekend for our Patreon supporters. So for those of you who want to hear part 2 and are not yet members of the Patreon, come find us at patreon.com/ordinaryunhappiness. This has been an episode of Ordinary Unhappiness, a podcast about psychoanalysis, politics, pop culture, and the ways we suffer now. I'm Abby Kluchin, and today I was joined by Patrick Blanchfield and Dan Yowell. This podcast is produced by Dan Yowell. Theme music by Formal Chicken.